The morning I found myself sitting on a curb outside a Walgreens in Savannah, Georgia, with nothing but a plastic grocery bag and a phone that had died 2 days before. That was the morning I stopped pretending everything was going to be okay. I was 63 years old. I had worked as a licensed practical nurse for 31 years. I had raised 2 children in a house I had paid for myself. A little yellow split level on Magnolia Drive that I had been so proud of. I used to wash the front steps on Saturday mornings just because I liked the way they looked when they were clean. And I was sitting on a curb outside a Walgreens. I want to tell you how I got there because it didn't happen the way people imagine these things happen. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, the way water gets into a wall. You don't see it until the whole thing caves in. My son's name is Kevin. He's 41 now. When he was small, he used to fall asleep in my lap watching baseball, and I would sit there for an hour after he drifted off, not wanting to move and wake him. I tell you that, so you understand that what came later didn't erase what came before. I loved that boy, I still do. But love doesn't protect you from everything, and it doesn't excuse everything either. Kevin moved back home when he was 36. He said he needed to get back on his feet after his second job fell through. His wife, Renee, came with him. I didn't mind at first. The house was big enough, and Renee seemed pleasant. She brought candles and rearranged the kitchen cabinet to fit her spice rack, and I told myself that was fine. That was just someone making themselves comfortable. What I didn't notice, or maybe what I noticed but talked myself out of, was how quickly comfortable became something else. It started with the bills. Kevin said he would take over managing the finances to help me out. I had been having some trouble with my knees and had cut my hours at the hospital, and my income had dropped. He set up automatic payments from my account. He was on the account already. I had added him years before when I had a health scare and wanted someone to be able to handle things if something happened to me. I trusted him with that, the way you trust your own child. You don't think about it. You just do it. The first time I noticed something off was when my credit card was declined at the grocery store. I thought it was a bank error. I went home and asked Kevin about it, and he said he had moved some money around to cover a repair on the car, and he would move it back. He sounded so reasonable. He had an explanation for everything, always, and the explanations always made just enough sense that I didn't push. Over the next year and a half, I pushed less and less. I don't know exactly when I stopped being able to see it clearly. I think it happened around the time Renee started making comments about how the house was hard to maintain at my age, how maybe I should think about downsizing. She said it gently. She was always gentle about it. That's what made it so effective. By the time Kevin sat me down and told me he had found a wonderful place for me, a senior community in Pooler, real nice, he said, activities and a dining hall, I had been so gradually moved to the edges of my own life that I didn't fight back the way I should have. He said the house was going to be too much for me to keep up with my reduced income. He said Renee's mother needed a place to stay and they were going to let her have the downstairs bedroom. He never once said they were keeping the house for themselves. He didn't have to. I moved into the senior community in February. Kevin paid the first month's deposit from my account. I know that now, though I didn't know it then. He said he would wire me a monthly allowance from my savings. The first month it came. The second month it was late. By the third month it stopped entirely. When I called Kevin, the calls went to voicemail. When I called Renee, she answered once, very briefly, and said Kevin was dealing with some work stress and she would have him call me back. He never called me back. I lasted 4 months at the community before they asked me to leave. I didn't have enough in my account to cover the next month's fees. I had not looked carefully at my statements, had not understood how much had been moved and where, and by the time I sat down with a woman at the front desk and went through it all, I found that my savings account had been reduced to less than $400. 31 years of nursing, 31 years of night shifts and double shifts and coming home so tired I fell asleep sitting up at the kitchen table. $400. I called my daughter Melissa. She lives in Charleston with her husband and their teenage son, and I had not wanted to burden her because she had her own pressures, her own life. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Mom, I can't have you here right now." She said it the same way you'd say you can't take on another project at work, measured, apologetic, but not enough to change anything. She said she would help me figure something out, and then she called twice over the next 2 weeks, and then she stopped calling. I don't talk about Melissa much when I tell this story. It hurts in a different way than Kevin hurts. Kevin was greedy. Melissa was just absent. I'm not sure which one is harder to forgive. I spent 6 days at a shelter in Savannah before I couldn't stand it anymore and left. I'm not going to describe those 6 days in detail because some things you keep for yourself. What I will say is that by the time I walked out with my grocery bag, I had made my peace with the idea that this was what my life had become, and I was not going to cry about it anymore. That was the morning I was sitting on the curb outside Walgreens. I had been there maybe 40 minutes when a white sedan slowed down near the curb and then stopped. I didn't look up at first. I was watching a pigeon that was working on a piece of pretzel someone had dropped. The car sat there. Then I heard a door open, and then I heard a voice say my name. I looked up. My sister Barbara was standing on the sidewalk in front of me. I need you to understand something about Barbara. We had not spoken in almost 9 years. Not because of a fight, exactly. More like a slow drift that became permanent. She had built a life very different from mine. After her second husband passed, she had taken over his real estate investment business and turned out to have a real mind for it. She lived in a house in Hilton Head I had only seen in photographs. We exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, and then we stopped doing even that. I had not told her anything about what had happened. I had not told anyone in my family, or anyone at all, really, because shame is a thing that seals you off from help without you even realizing it's happening. So when she said my name and I looked up and saw her standing there in slacks and a light blue blouse, looking at me like she was trying very hard not to fall apart, I didn't know what to say. I just looked at her. She sat down on the curb next to me, not beside me at a careful distance, right next to me, close enough that our arms were touching. She said, "I've been looking for you for 3 weeks." I said, "How did you find me?" She said she had called the hospital where I used to work and spoken to a woman in HR who remembered me. That woman had given her nothing, of course, they couldn't. But she had asked around, and through a series of connections that Barbara pieced together over days, she had tracked me to Savannah. I asked her why. Why she had looked. Why after 9 years she had suddenly come looking. She said, "Because Kevin called me." I went very still. She said Kevin had called her 6 weeks earlier. He was looking for contact information from my old nursing colleagues. He said for something he was organizing. She said his voice had the quality of someone who had practiced what they were going to say, and that something about the call had sat wrong with her for days. And she had finally called the senior community where she had eventually learned I had been asked to leave. And she had started putting things together, and then she had driven to Savannah. She didn't cry when she told me all this. Barbara has never been a crier. But there was something in her jaw, something tight and set, that told me how angry she was. She said, "Come with me." Not "come with me." "Please, come with me and I'll explain everything. Just come with me." I picked up my grocery bag. We drove to Hilton Head that afternoon. I slept in her guest room, a real bed, curtains that let in the morning light. And I slept for 11 hours and woke up and didn't know for a moment where I was. Barbara had been busy while I was sleeping. She had spoken to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, her business lawyer, a man who had handled her real estate transactions for 12 years and who also had experience with elder financial abuse cases. She had documented everything she could access, the timeline of Kevin's moves, what I could remember of the account activity, the sequence of events at the senior community. She had also, she told me over breakfast, already transferred a sum of money into a new account she had opened in my name only. She used the word sum and didn't specify the amount right away, and I didn't ask because honestly what I was feeling at that moment had nothing to do with money. What I was feeling was that someone had come to find me. That someone had looked. Later she told me the amount, $300,000 to start. She said to start the way other people say, pass the salt. She also said she wanted to buy something for me, and that she had already been in touch with a real estate contact in Bluffton, which is just outside of Hilton Head, about a small condominium in a gated community about 4 minutes from her house. I said, Barbara, I cannot accept that. She said, you can, and you will. She said it the way she used to say things when we were girls, and she had made up her mind about something. I remembered that. 40 years disappeared in a second, and she was 16 again, and I was 19, and she had already decided. The condo was on the second floor of a quiet building with a small balcony that looked out over a stretch of marsh. It was move-in ready. It had a galley kitchen and 2 bedrooms and a washer and dryer and a closet and a parking spot with my name on a little sign. I walked through it the first time with my hands clasped in front of me because I was afraid if I touched anything, I would believe it and then somehow it would be taken away. Barbara handled the legal process with a precision I think surprised even her own lawyer. Because Kevin had been a joint account holder on my original account, what he had done existed in a gray area. Not impossible to prosecute, but complicated. What the lawyer focused on instead was the paper trail around the house. Kevin had, in the months before I moved out, quietly had me sign a document during a visit that I had understood to be related to home maintenance authorizations. I hadn't read it carefully. That document had given him power of attorney for property matters. The lawyer said this was not uncommon in elder financial abuse cases. He said it quietly and professionally, and I sat there in his office and listened to myself be described as an elder abuse victim, and something in me went very flat. Barbara leaned forward and said, "What can we actually do?" The lawyer laid it out. We could pursue civil litigation. Given the power of attorney document and the account activity, we had grounds. Additionally, Barbara had located, through her own research, the fact that Kevin and Renee had taken out a home equity line of credit against my house within 60 days of me moving out. That was the piece that changed everything. The house was still legally in my name. Kevin had not yet completed the transfer. He had been in the process of doing so when Barbara's lawyer sent a letter. I think about that sometimes, the timing of it. A few more weeks and the house would have been gone. We did not get the house back in the end. The legal process was long and expensive, and Barbara paid for all of it without complaint. And what we settled on was a financial judgment against Kevin for the amount that had been drained from my accounts, plus damages. Kevin and Renee had to sell the house to satisfy the judgment. They did not come out ahead. They did not come out even close to ahead. Kevin called me once during the process. I don't know how he got the number for my new phone. He said he hadn't meant for things to go this far, that it had started as temporary borrowing and gotten out of hand. He sounded genuinely sorry. I listened to him for about 2 minutes and then I said, "Kevin, I sat on a curb outside of Walgreens. I had $400. I said it very calmly and then I hung up. He hasn't called since. 3 weeks after I moved into the Bluffton condo, Renee showed up at my door. She was alone. She'd driven from Savannah with what looked like a store-bought flower arrangement, daisies and something yellow I don't know the name of. She was wearing a nice blouse and her hair was done, and she smiled when I opened the door. That particular kind of smile that is trying to look like it's not working hard. I looked at her. I looked at the flowers. I said, "Renee, I think you should go." She said she just wanted to talk. Just a few minutes, she wanted me to understand that she had cared about me, that this had all been Kevin's idea, that she had felt uncomfortable about it the whole time. I said, "You rearranged my kitchen. You moved into my house and rearranged my kitchen and suggested I would be better off in a senior community, and you felt uncomfortable the whole time." She started to say something else and I closed the door. I stood in my little galley kitchen for a moment after that, and I noticed that my hands were not shaking. I had half expected them to shake. They were completely steady. I called Barbara. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does, and I told her what had happened, and there was a brief silence. And then she said, "Good for you." We talked for an hour that evening. We've talked almost every evening since. 9 years of silence, and now we talk on the phone while she's doing her bookkeeping and I'm drinking tea on my balcony watching the marsh go dark. I don't know exactly what we lost during those 9 years, but I know we're not going to lose any more of it. I went back to work part time. There's a pediatric clinic in Bluffton that needed someone experienced 2 days a week. And when I interviewed, the doctor who ran it said she preferred nurses who had seen everything. I told her I had definitely seen everything. She hired me on the spot. My Social Security and my pension, yes, I have a pension, 31 years earns you a pension, had been untouched because Kevin hadn't had access to those accounts. I don't know if he hadn't found them or hadn't gotten to them yet. I don't think about it too much. What I know is that I have them now. Along with the judgment settlement and what Barbara gave me, I am more financially secure at 63 than I was at 55, which is a strange and uncomfortable fact that I have mostly made peace with. Melissa called 4 months after everything was resolved. She had heard what happened through a cousin. She cried on the phone. She said she was sorry. I believe she was. I told her I appreciated the call and I would think about things, and we would talk again sometime. I haven't called her back yet. I'm still thinking about things. The marsh outside my balcony changes color depending on the time of day and the season. In the morning, it's almost silver. In the late afternoon in summer, it goes a deep olive green that I don't have a name for. At dusk, it turns the color of old copper. I sit out there most evenings and I watch it change, and I drink my tea, and sometimes Barbara calls and sometimes she doesn't, and either way, I'm okay. I spent 31 years taking care of other people's worst moments. I cleaned wounds and held hands and stood in hallways at 3 in the morning and waited to see if someone was going to make it through the night. I know what it means to be in the worst moment. I know what it looks like from the inside. What I didn't know, what I had to learn the hard way, sitting on a curb with a plastic bag and a dead phone, is that being strong doesn't mean you can absorb everything. Being strong means you know when to let someone sit down next to you on the curb. Barbara sat down next to me. That's the whole story. The rest is just the marsh changing color and the tea getting cold, and my sister's voice on the phone, and the particular quiet of an evening when you know the door is locked and nothing is coming through it tonight. I've had a lot of time to sit with all of it. On the balcony mostly, watching the marsh, letting the quiet do what quiet does when you finally stop running from it. And what I keep coming back to, what I keep turning over in my hands like something I found and don't quite know what to do with, is how none of it was an accident. Not the bad parts and not the good parts either. Kevin didn't set out one morning and decide to become someone who would leave his mother on a curb. That's not how it works. It happened the way most slow disasters happen. One small choice at a time, each one a little easier than the last, because the one before it had already moved the line. He borrowed a little. Then he moved a little more. Then he stopped calling. And by the time he was standing in my house with Renee's mother's things in the hallway, he had made so many small choices in one direction that the person he'd become didn't recognize what he'd done. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of how people lose themselves, and I have to be honest about my own part in it. I let things go unread. I trusted without verifying because checking felt like an accusation, and I couldn't bring myself to accuse my own son. I confused love with surrender. I thought that if I held on loosely enough, didn't demand too much, stayed easy to be around, I thought that was what good mothers did. What I actually did was make myself easy to take advantage of. There's a difference between giving freely and giving because you're afraid to ask questions. I didn't understand that difference until I had $400 and a plastic bag. 31 years of nursing taught me that the body keeps an accounting. Every choice you make, everything you ignore or push through or refuse to address, eventually the body presents the bill. People don't end up in a hospital room randomly. Most of the time there were warnings, small ones, that got explained away or postponed. Life works the same way. The bill always comes. But here's the other side of that, and this is the part I want to hold on to. The accounting works both ways. Barbara spent 9 years building something real and honest. She made hard decisions, took on real risk, learned things most people never bother to learn, and when the moment came to find me, She had the resources and the will to do it. She had built herself into someone who could show up. That wasn't luck. That was the result of 9 years of quiet daily choices in the right direction. What Kevin lost was never going to stay anyway. You cannot hold something that was taken. Whatever piece a person might buy with borrowed money or someone else's house, it doesn't keep. It corrodes from the inside because it was built on a rotten foundation. I didn't have to do anything to bring that outcome about. He brought it about himself. I'm 63 years old. I have a condo in Bluffton and a job I like and a sister who answers the phone on the second ring. I have my pension and my social security and the particular satisfaction of knowing that everything I have right now I got back honestly. What I want people to take from my story isn't that things worked out. Sometimes they don't work out this cleanly. What I want them to take is this: pay attention to the small choices, the ones that feel like nothing, the ones that are easy to make because no one is watching. Those are the choices that build a life, or quietly dismantle one. And if you're someone who has been taken from, who has been made small by people who should have protected you, your job is not to harden. Your job is to stay clear-eyed enough to let the right person sit down next to you when they come. Barbara came. I let her sit down. That was my best decision in years.